9 lessons and carols for Advent on YouTube, which was filmed or recorded at King's College, Cambridge. And it was fantastic. And as we watched, they began with the need for the incarnation, the fall, the lostness of man, and then progressing through the promises of the coming Messiah, and then the birth of Jesus, the nativity, and then the cross, and then his return. The whole thing is wrought in this. So we greatly enjoyed it. The music was exceptionally good. King's College, Cambridge is world famous for their choral program. The college came into existence through the initiative of King Henry VI, not the VIII. So a couple of Henrys before the VIII, who was notorious. But anyway, part of his bequest for the college was that they would always have choristers, which means a boys' choir, and then a choral program at the college. And so they do what they call choral evensong almost every night of the week. And it's just very reverent, beautiful music. So we watched this and I thought, I'm really impressed at how they put all this together. And the words they said, you would agree with, I agreed with. We just rejoiced in it. Well, I have the habit of when I'm working, I have music going in the background. So this morning, when I got up at 5:15 and started reviewing for today, I put on another one. And this one was from Magdalen College in Oxford. And you know what? It's just like the one from King's College, Cambridge. And suddenly I realized they were going through the liturgy. They were going through what Thomas Cranmer wrote in the Book of Common Prayer in the 16th century. It's, how much they believed what they were saying, I don't know. But my attitude is what Paul says in Philippians 1, I rejoice when the gospel is proclaimed. Whether in pretense or in truth, I rejoice. And so that was my experience. So that gave me more encouragement to look at Christmas for what, I already looked at it for what it really is. It's the incarnation. But that it's to be celebrated. So just thinking about the things that Sarah said, I can understand. And I think it's good that we prayed about it. Christmas is not a festival that is described in the New Testament. The incarnation is described. The birth of Jesus is described. The coming of the wise men, the coming of the shepherds, all of that's described. So we are celebrating something that's in the Scripture, but the way we celebrate it, of course, has a lot of leeway in it. Different cultures do it different ways. I've been teaching in Italy now for several years, usually always in February, I guess. And this last summer, I spoke, I didn't speak, I participated in the Rome Scholars Network, which is an initiative started by a very evangelical Protestant who came to faith as a teenager and has studied through his PhD in England, and very evangelical man, and he completely rejects the celebration of Christmas. He pastors a church there in Rome, a few blocks from the Vatican. It's small, of course. But there are people in his congregation who come to me and said, can you talk to Leonardo? We can't even sing Christmas carols in church at Christmas time. So this is an interesting dilemma. Here's this man that is tremendously biblical. Really deeply biblical. But he's got this viewpoint on culture that he wants to completely, keep it aside. Because he's seen maybe, I don't know, perhaps what culture has done with the Catholic Church. In any case, the thing that it's caused me to reflect on and think about is we need to celebrate consciously with an awareness of what we're celebrating. What it is that this is about, not just the traditions. And it's an ongoing process for us. We think about it anew every year and talk about it and try to enjoy some old traditions at the same time we remember what it's really all about. Okay, that was a freebie. We will get...
It's interesting that in the Wearsby Church, the Baptist church that I grew up in, they celebrated no festivals. They didn't celebrate Easter. They didn't celebrate Christmas. They had some sermons that were sort of based in that, but no kids paintings on the wall associated with any of those festivals because of the New Testament injunctions against festivals.
Against pagan festivals.
Well, festivals,
yeah. Okay, well, I would like to get through eternal security today, which we probably won't, but at least I hope to get through it before we leave, which is not that far away. I wanted to pick up here because of our discussion last week, and Matthew, who is not here today, I'm sorry, brought us the Wesleyan perspective, and I thought more about the things that he said, and so I wanted to change what I had on my slide just a little bit. According to the Wesleyan Arminian perspective of when we are saved, when is a person saved? When he or she is justified? Question mark. And the answer to that is yes. Now last week I said no, when they hold out to the end, then they're saved. That's wrong. So I want to correct that. According to the Wesleyan Arminian perspective, justification does take place at the point of faith. So the person is justified. Whether or not they will continue to the end is still open in their beliefs, but they do believe in justification by faith alone. And certainly John Wesley, as he had his extraordinary evangelistic ministry in the 18th century, that was at the very heart of it. And he himself came to his assurance of salvation, his confidence that he was born again, when he exercised faith as a result of hearing Luther's commentary, preface to Luther's commentary on the book of Romans, read aloud in a meeting of the Moravians in London. So, Wesley did by all means believe in justification by faith alone. But he also believed you could lose it. So the possibility of falling away is there in the Wesleyan Arminian theology. So, do they believe that salvation comes after you're sanctified? No, they don't. But they do believe if a person continues in the faith, then their salvation is secure. So continuing in the faith is key to that justification enduring. So the perseverance, the enduring to the end is what comes into question there with their theological position. So are they first saved when they get to heaven? No. For the Wesleyan, as for me, and I consider myself a moderate Calvinist, in case you have ever wondered, they believe that heaven is the consummation of salvation, salvation that took place as a result of faith while on earth. So I want always, when I present various viewpoints, to present them fairly, so that the person who is, if a person from that perspective is sitting here, he would not say that I misrepresented them, but rather, yeah, that was a proper understanding.
Is there not an inconsistency that if a person is under that theological framework justified and then subsequently falls away, does falling away mean that he or she goes to hell?
Yes.
Then a justified person goes to hell?
A justified person loses their justification in that view.
Then justification is no longer justification.
True. At that point, it's no longer justification.
Does not mean justification then, really.
Yeah. It's like the Roman Catholic view, which I had up on the screen. I'm not going to go backwards on all the slides. It takes too long. But the infant is justified with initial justification at baptism. And whether or not they get full justification depends on if they live a just life, take the Mass. Oh, it does. That's very much. And the Wesleyan would agree that that's a works view. But the Wesleyan would not accept the idea that there's this works, because the continuing the faith, the persevering, that's by faith too, not by works.
Is this the seed issue? When seed falls by the path, it grows a little bit. So seed is justification. It's born to the Wesleyan view, and then it grows, and then it does not survive because the world entangles it. And I'm talking about the which verse I'm talking about.
Right. You're talking about the parable of the sower and the four soils.
Right.
And I can't tell you exactly how the Wesleyans would interpret that parable. My assumption is they would probably say that the soil with the weeds is the believer who really was born again, but because of the entanglements of the world, loses it. That's probably, and let me emphasize the probably, because I haven't looked up an Armenian interpretation of that. Sarah's next.
If I recall correctly, what Matt was saying last week was that they used the analogy of marriage.
Yes.
That marriage was always intended to be forever, but if you decide that you want to divorce God, He's not going to force Himself upon you. And if you decide you don't want Him anymore, then He's not going to force you to spend eternity with Him.
Yeah, that's the Wesleyan view, yeah. And thank you for bringing that up, because after class my wife said, marriage is not a good illustration. Family, father and son, father and daughter, that's a biblical illustration of rebirth, spiritual birth. So John 1:12 says, to as many as received Him, to them He gave the right to become children of God, to those who believe in His name. I am the son of Wayne and Helen Hyatt, and there is absolutely nothing I can do to change that. I will always be their son. Even if I'm bad, yeah. And, the prodigal is an example of that. He was still the son. Bill?
I think maybe the Armenians really don't understand the sovereignty of God. If they can lose their salvation, son, then God is weak.
Okay, hold on to that, because I'm going to get there eventually.
You do realize we're all putting Trent in a position of trying to argue a viewpoint that's not his own.
But I really do want to be fair. And I really do regard, Wesleyans and Arminians who believe in Jesus as their Savior as my brothers and sisters. And therefore, I want to treat them respectfully and try to understand why they think the way they do without, characterizing or misrepresenting them. Okay. What are the means of salvation? And this is really important. The means of salvation in the Roman Catholic answer is sacraments, plus faith, plus works. And as you might remember, if you had some church history from me, when the Protestant Reformation broke out and the tremendous challenges that came from the Reformers were reacted to at the council that unfortunately is called the Council of Trent. And at the Council of Trent, the Catholics rejected sola fides, sola scriptura, sola gratia, which are by faith alone, the authority of the Scriptures alone, by grace alone. They rejected them explicitly and said, salvation comes, justification is by faith plus works. So that's dogmatically declared in an official church document. And you also need to remember the Catholic Church regards dogmatic statements, those that come from an official church council or from a pope speaking ex cathedra, they regard them as irreformable. They can't be changed. Why not? Because the church and the Pope are infallible. If you're infallible, then you don't ever need to change anything. You always say the right thing. So therefore, according to the Catholic answer, salvation comes by the sacraments. And it involves faith plus works.
Yeah, I'm unenlightened. When having a conversation with a Catholic that knows what he believes.
Mm-hmm.
And he really sees me as inadequate. I'm unenlightened.
Uh-huh.
Because I just use the scriptures.
Mm-hmm. That's because you believe in sola scriptura, by the authority of the scriptures alone. Doesn't mean that you think you have all of the answers, but it does mean that you believe that the answer is in the scriptures. And that's what's determinative. Okay, that's the Catholic view. The Eastern Orthodox answer is even worse. The Eastern Orthodox answer is it's the sacraments plus faith plus striving plus works. They have a word in Russian for this striving. I forget what it is. I'm sorry, but it probably wouldn't help you anyway. But it's regarded as extremely important, the struggle. You got to work for it. And so consequently, one of their theologians says, salvation is the result of synergy. You know what synergy is? Two things working together. So God works and I work. And when that happens, then salvation results. So it is a cooperative effort that will get you to heaven, according to Orthodox theology. The Reformed/Baptist, and I know that Baptists don't share all of the Reformed views, but they share some of them. They say the means of salvation is election, calling, by faith alone, through grace alone. You notice where that starts. We'll come back to that. It starts with election. The Wesleyan Arminian view is it comes by faith alone, through grace alone. They agree with the Baptist and the Reformed. But they believe continuing faith is necessary for salvation. And I will come back to, we'll go there right now. Why are the answers so different? Each one of those Christian traditions that I just presented gives a different answer. And the answer is it comes down to the doctrines of election and justification. Roman Catholics, justification is being made righteous. And because you actually become righteous through the infusion of God's righteousness, therefore you're justified. So justification follows being made righteous. So think with me, because this is kind of complicated and most people don't understand it, and this was really the heart of the Reformation. It's when Luther grasped that he didn't have to be righteous before God saw him as righteous, that his life was changed. That's what resulted in the transformation of Martin Luther, which set him loose to lead the Reformation. Before that, he was scared to death of God. He was constantly in fear of God. But when he grasped that righteousness was a gift of God as a result of faith, he was changed. So he came into real conflict with his church. Remember, he was a monk, a priest, a professor of theology, a doctor of theology, which was all Catholic that he had been taught. He said that God declared him righteous. And that was justification. A declaration, a divine declaration, not first make him righteous and then him being accepted as righteous. So that's the difference with the Catholics. With the Orthodox, they actually don't even talk about justification. It's just a remarkable thing. I've read, I don't know, dozens of books by Orthodox theologians, and they only talk about justification when they're in some kind of dialogue with Protestants who bring it up. Because it's not only not important, it's so unimportant to them, they don't talk about it. What they talk about is union with God, or deification, the process of becoming God. God, the thing you'll hear them say over and over again is God became man so man could become God. It has a really dangerous ring. Sounds like Mormons, yeah. But it's different from Mormons. It really is. They don't believe we're going to become God like in our essence, so that we would be equal with God the Trinity. But we do become something called God. And that's what salvation is all about, becoming God. So who's deified? The people who struggle for righteousness, who avail themselves of the means of becoming holy, which are the sacraments, the icons, and the veneration of those. Then you might become holy. Holy means deification. Tammy?
Where do the Mormons get the idea to pray for the dead? They baptize the dead?
1 Corinthians 15. So it's one of the most difficult verses in the entire New Testament to figure out what Paul was saying. And he says, otherwise, why do you baptize for the dead? Yeah, I'm not going to talk about it today because, first of all, I don't know what it means. And secondly, you spend the rest of the time. So I don't know. But I do know that's where the Mormons get the idea. Okay? So salvation is viewed so completely different by Orthodox that my thoroughgoing opinion, my deep conviction is you can't be a genuine Orthodox, believe Orthodox doctrine, and be an evangelical. Because you believe something that is so much in contradiction to essential evangelical doctrine. In the same way, I don't believe an evangelical can be a true evangelical and then become an Orthodox and become a true Orthodox. The two are really not compatible. That's my opinion. That's why I want to write a book. The Reformed Baptists, they start with election, and they affirm justification by faith alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone, to God's glory alone. So if you'll notice, I keep coming back to these 5 solas, the 5 solas of the Reformation, because I regard them as right at the heart of our evangelical faith. We recognize the authority of the Scripture above all other authorities. We recognize justification as coming by faith alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone, and it's all to God's glory alone, not to ours. So those things have become extraordinarily important to me, and I think the Reformers got it right. That's really the essence of New Testament Christianity. With the Wesleyans, the justification is by faith alone, through grace alone, through Christ alone. But one must continue in his faith until the end to be finally saved. God knows who will believe, and he elects them.
Uh-oh.
So that's what I was trying to get to, Bill. You cannot just reject election. It doesn't work because it's in the Bible in several places. So you have to understand a way to reconcile election with the possibility of losing your salvation. So there is a real tension that arises out of that. So the Wesleyan Arminian viewpoint on election is, yes, God elects, but he elects those whom he knows, because of his foreknowledge, will believe. So he elects those who will believe. Whereas the Reformed Baptists say, those people who are elected will believe. Notice the difference in the order? The elect will believe, and because they're elect and they believe, they will persevere. So perseverance is an important, I see the hands, but let me finish this. The perseverance is an important New Testament doctrine because the saved must persevere. But is their perseverance the basis of their salvation, Or is it something that God enables them to do because He chose them? That's the question you've got to decide on. My personal opinion is we will persevere if we are genuinely born again. If we fall away and never come back, then we weren't genuinely born again. So there's two ways of looking at the Christian, or the apparent Christian, who goes along for a while, gives every appearance of being a Christian, then they fall away, reject the faith, and they don't come back. The Arminian way of explaining that is simple. They fell away. They lost their salvation. The Reformed way of looking at that is they didn't lose their salvation. They never had it. And the Wesleyan way of looking at it has some strengths because it really does look like that person was really saved. But it has some weaknesses in it's very difficult to reconcile with the doctrine of election. If God elects, how do you become unelect?
Amen, amen.
Okay, Sarah, and then I think Tammy, and then Art.
The real question, though, Trent.
I'm not gonna touch the unelect thing. I was just gonna say, when you were talking about whether if you will, exactly when the election happens, I was thinking like, and pardon me if this gets into physics or anything, if God is outside of time, and God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then that means that if He knew something now, He also knew it before He created time. And so when time ends, everything He knew then, He also knows now, and also knows before He made the universe. So if we're dickering about when God knows things, that kind of doesn't make sense, because He knows everything all the time.
Excellent observation.
So you kind of can't say, well, did He choose them before or after?
Well, in fact, it says before the foundation of the world is what it says in Ephesians 1.
So that dickering about exactly whether they were chosen or elected first and because of what kind of doesn't entirely make sense.
Yeah, I see your point, and that's very, very good analysis. Tammy, your question?
Revelation chapter 3, it said, in verse 3, remember therefore, while you have received, what you have received, and hold fast, and repent. But if you do not, wake up, I will come like a thief, and you will not know it. And I will blot your name out of the book of life.
And I what?
Blot your name out of the book of life.
Yep, blot your name out of the book of life.
Does that mean you can't keep your salvation?
Sounds like it, doesn't it?
Well, it sounds like you do, so.
Yeah, sure does.
If you don't repent, so once saved, always saved, is that?
Okay, good question. Thank you, Tammy. Art, you had a question, because I'm going to have to stop now. It's 25 after.
Okay, the real question here is who is in control? Okay, if God is looking forward in the future to see who is going to save, who He's going to save, He's not in control anymore. He's waiting to see who's going to make the choice. It's called conditional election as opposed to unconditional election.
Yeah.
One of my professors at seminary, you knew him, Phil Hook, explained it this way. He said, if God is waiting to see who will choose Him, then our salvation is not subject to God's choice, it's subject to blind fate. Our circumstances, who we were born into, whether we got up on the right side of the bed or the wrong side of the bed some morning, whether we ate the right meal someday or not, whether we got sick or not, God is no longer in control. It's just blind faith. Now, would you like to have your eternal salvation subject to blind faith? Or would you like to have your salvation subject to the choice of God? I'd rather turn it over to God's hands.
If He chooses me.
That's right.
Whatever He chooses is going to be the right choice.
Whatever He chooses is going to be the right choice. Okay, folks. we'll look at this question next week.